Ahoy! We are finally getting some Season 7 news. And this is specifically about the new PvP servers that are coming that are forced PvP. We have no information about the rest of the season yet, but let's talk about this part. Now, there is a lot of information about it, and we're not going to go through all of it in super deep detail because I also want to talk about my thoughts on this, and I will break down some of the mechanics behind it in a future video. I made a whole presentation for that at this point, so we'll save that for its own thing. But what we now know here is that the first iteration of Seasonal Worlds introduces a PvP-focused rule set where players are flagged for PvP at all times after reaching level 15 or choosing a faction. So you will even be flagged if you're not choosing a faction, you're just going without a faction, you're still going to be flagged for PvP apparently. Don't know how that will work because we have not seen a flagged unfaction player before outside of the PvP area. So that in itself is already somewhat interesting. And other than that, this is kind of just more describing how it's going to feel to play in those servers. It's saying that you're basically rediscovering the game in a new light. There will be gear exclusive to these worlds, Ethereal and Conquerors gear, and they needed to set up some systems to make sure it doesn't actually end up being available on other servers as well, until at least after this event is finished. We get to that later. And you will also be able to create a new character. We're getting an additional character slot for this world. As some of you may already know, they added durability and drop on death to these new items, these specific items. So they're going to be of high value, but also high risk, high reward, basically. They say ultimately we want players out in the open world wearing ethereal gear, trying to get more wrath stones, which is the material used to craft Conquerors gear. So what exactly happens here? The Ethereal and Conquerors item drop on death and have durability, and Conquerors items lose much more durability on death compared to ethereal items. So even if you manage to steal someone's Conquerors item, it'll not last quite as long anymore because it'll lose a fair amount of durability. They are stronger than other items. All of the weapons have an increased base damage of 20%, and armor and jewelry all at 3% damage absorption per piece. And because of these changes, no gems can be added to these items. That's somewhat interesting because it means you have a more consistent base damage increase than most gems would allow for, and you also have absorption against everything instead of gearing either against physical or elemental, and it's also a high value with 3%, but you also can't target something like fire damage. But then again, you don't have to wear all Ethereal and all Conquerors, and I think the logic with them not having gems is that you are likely to lose these items, so you would constantly have to get new gems for these items, and that could be quite frustrating and quite expensive. So no gems, and they just have something that is somewhat better than gems by itself, and then they also have other additional effects. So ethereal items give players access to wrath stones, which are used to craft powerful Conquerors items. Though wrath stones also draw on death, the only way to create or generate wrath stones will be through wearing specific ethereal gear, so probably not just all ethereal gear, while farming elite points of interest, darkness breaches or corruption breaches, and gathering resources. Now this is weird because these are not the activities I would have expected on a PvP server, but I guess the idea here is that they are trying to turn those areas into highly contested areas where you kind of know that people will be hanging around these areas to get their wrath stones, so you go in there and try to fight them for their wrath stones. At least that's my understanding. But then I don't know how gathering resources plays into this as well, what kind of resources apply here, if you need specific ethereal gear for each of these. So there's a specific gathering ethereal gear that only gives you wrath stones from gathering resources or something like that. Again, specifics are yet to be talked about here, but I don't know if this is going to work because obviously we had the PvP island that did not work out very well in terms of actually encouraging PvP. I think it will be different on this time. I think PvP will be more aggressive, but I still don't know if this is what people will want to do. So, big question mark. Ethereal items, when broken down, yield ethereal dust, and frequent crafting is advised due to high demand. Again, I'm going to explain this in more detail in a separate video, but to quickly over it, you get the dust by refining wood, ore, fiber, hide, and stone into ethereal dust at a refining station. So you basically go and gather raw mats and then can turn them into dust, or you can obtain it by salvaging ethereal gear. Ethereal animus is gained by crafting it at a refining station for 100 ethereal dust, and you need the ethereal animus because it gives you 2500 play experience, as well as a chance to drop the following items: sandpaper, tendon, solvent, flux, wire weave, not that important, but also ethereal mount food, which is probably going to be the quickest way to level up your mount. There are some other ways in which that is quicker too. Mount straps and shoes. I guess this is like horseshoes, or I don't think this is like actual boots. I think this is horseshoes. And all tier 4 hard runes, tier 4 being the 700 gear score variant, so you can kind of skip the upgrading of hard runes, and crafting recipes for all Conquerors weapons. There is also Conquerors armor, some you will have unlocked as a recipe right from the start. I'm not sure how you will be able to get the light and medium armor, or if they meant gear here. Could be that they just meant items in general, but they say it's just the weapons. They want us to not spend too much time on the grind and to level up quicker, so all player XP, weapon mastery, and trade skill XP is increased by 25% on this world. Additionally, you have the ethereal dust, which gives you a bonus XP as well. And they say here that this resource can be obtained by refining core resources or by salvaging ethereal gear. The higher value the resource or item is, the more dust you get. So it could be worth to level something up quickly in order to farm higher tier resources and then be able to farm dust quicker through that. This resource is also the primary way to discover and unlock new Conquerors crafting, gear crafting recipes via the animus. We already had that. And all ethereal gear has a level 15 requirement, and Conquerors gear has a level 20 requirement to use. There are different tiers though. That means if you manage to kill or take someone's gear, or you have powerful friends, you can be competitive even if at lower levels with the right gear. I'm assuming that means that all of this gear will be tradable as well, saying that they say if you have powerful friends. And since there's only this level requirement mentioned here, it might be possible that you can actually have tier 5 gear at level 15 or level 20, which would be interesting because if you look at the ethereal description here, ethereal gear is considerably cheaper and easier to craft, considerably cheap to craft, and has a high gear score at every tier. The crafting cost for ethereal items is half the material cost of the same tier item equivalent, which honestly is not that cheap. Like half the cost of some items is still fairly expensive, but tier 2 ethereal items are gear score 350, so this is where you start out. Tier 3 are 600, tier 4 are 700, and tier 5 are 725. And again, it might be that you can actually equip this at level 15. I'm not sure if that will be the case. But if we're going by these tier numbers, and if they are actually referring to the same tier equivalent, then this tier 5 here doesn't mean you need half of the normal prismatics. Based on how I understand this, and based on how the tiers work, this would basically be the equivalent to orichalcum gear. I'm not sure if you'd have to have Asmodeum instead of orichalcum, but it should be tier 2 iron. And probably not actually, because if it's always 725, it should probably be locked. So it should be iron, then steel, then star metal, and then orichalcum right here. And with this lock gear score, that should kind of keep the overall cost at a reasonable level. At the same time, you have to keep in mind that resources will be very contested because everyone is PvP flagged all the time. So yeah, not quite sure how this will balance out, how this will work out in terms of resources required, and what you can actually do at level 15, but it might be that you can skip ahead very, very quickly. The mount skill is also automatically unlocked at level 15 without having to do the quest. And again, you have the new improved mount victuals or mount food that you can get from this new animus, so you might not have to worry much about getting all too much mount food the normal way or doing the riding quests. And then you have the hard rune equip slot, which is also automatically unlocked once you get to level 65. And again, you can get the hard runes through the Ethereal animals. Here, I want to point out that you can actually reach level 65 on the server, something that I understood differently beforehand. And I'm going to show you this clip because this really confused me when I read this, because it didn't align with what I heard at all. So I'm going to show you the exact moment that confused me.
You know, the first server, not as you know, but as you know now, the first server is PvP focused, and that's something that's near and dear to me. I've played a lot of games over the years that I really enjoy that risk-reward feeling. The first server is at level 15. You'll be fighting other...
The first server is at level 15. Maybe he meant to continue that sentence. Maybe this, you'll be fighting other players, blah, blah, was meant to be in the same sentence. I thought he just slightly misspoke and meant that the first server was at level 50, and that would be the level cap. That is not the case. At level 15, you're getting flagged. That's all that happens. There is no level cap. You go up to level 65 as normal, which I think is unfortunate, but we'll get back to that in a moment. You can craft ethereal gear right away. From character creation, you have the option to craft a full set of ethereal gear, basically. They have PvP focused perks, high gear score, low requirements, and special perks that allow players to generate wrathstones from special activities. So you want to get some pieces early, but again, you also have to be very careful with that because they can also drop when you die. So yeah, risk reward once again. And you also start out with the recipes to craft Conquerors from heavy armor that you can craft with wrathstones and get additional recipes from the Ethereal animals once again. We have some examples of Conquerors weapons here. The first one is the Crescent Wave Greatsword. Crescent Wave, while above 50% health, heavy attacks consume 20 mana to cast a wave projectile forward, dealing 150% weapon damage. So a semi-ranged version of the Greatsword, very interesting. Other than that, it's a refreshing move, leeching cross-trenchant strikes, so decent perks overall, I would say at least. And this perk with the mana consumption is also extremely interesting since it's not an artifact, so you should be able to use it along with artifacts, meaning it could have some very interesting combo effects with Abyss where you can increase your damage further there. If that's a combination you want to try out, Great Sword and Great Axe, could be pretty cool. Yeaterson's Hammer is a warhammer with Yeet as its trait. Plus 400% push distance and plus 30% base damage to all Warhammer knockback, so Clear Out. Clear Out will ignite the first target hit, turning them into a projectile, causing 150% weapon damage to all enemies they pass through. Sundering Clear Out, Plague Strikes, and Refreshing Move on this one, not perfect, but solid perks, but really you're getting it for the passive effect, which sounds extremely fun, but it also is super obvious, so the moment anyone sees you pushing anyone back like that, they know that you have an interesting weapon for them, and you might not hold it for much longer if you're unlucky. I want to highlight this particular segment here. Seasonal exclusive rewards are like titles, mount attachments, and skins are designed to make your time on these worlds unforgettable. They are obtained through a new journey for the seasonal server inside of the Season Pass and seasonal server specific leaderboards. To obtain rewards from the seasonal server journey, you must purchase the premium pass. It is unclear to me what exactly this includes, which of the skins, which of the titles, if this means that all of the skins that are coming from this new gear are only obtainable this way, because I assumed you could get them through transmog after unlocking them. I don't know if that will be the case. This skin, for example, I'm pretty sure is new. Then we have this skin here that is new. So there are a few that I would hope we would be able to get somehow, and I hope it's not exclusively blocked behind the Season Pass. There are the seasonal server-specific leaderboards, which can allow you to win things such as mount attachments, a helm skin, a tent skin, a new PvP-focused housing trophy. This unique PvP trophy provides a bonus to PvP experience when equipped in your house, something that I think a lot of people would like. And that will be obtainable in different ways later on as well, but you can get it on this server first before it's made available to all players in a future season. They mentioned that respawn timers in PvP have been extended without specifying for what modes or whatever, and open world leaderboards track the most fearsome conquerors and skilled crafters. When the season is over, players don't lose their progress, characters can transfer, ensuring that the effort carries over. However, items like Ethereal and Conquerors gear will be converted to competitive item replacements with perks focused on PvP in gear score that will have an impact at the tier level of gear. These items will be bound to your character. As an example, Conquerors gear will be converted to gear score 715, while tier 5 Ethereal gear will convert to 705. I guess it would be a little bit too easy to otherwise just dump a full 725 set into your storage without touching it, and then converting that over to another server and being like, hey, I just geared up this character that is probably better gear out than my regular character now. Now, I have a few concerns when it comes to how these servers are handled. The first one of them is that the max level will be level 65. I thought the meta would have been shook up in a much more interesting way if they didn't do that and instead actually kept it at level 50, as I misunderstood, because that would have been a completely different game in so many ways. A game without artifacts, for example, which I really do not want to farm again for the, I don't know how many times I've done it now, it's third time at least. Then I would have liked to see the different weapons and how they scale at that level, and really just having less access to certain things and see how that shifts things around. Like, for example, not having access to hard runes again, not having access to as many perks, and suddenly you'd have a completely new meta. And of course, these new items, the ethereal items, as well as the higher tier items, will in a way also introduce a new meta. I'm not doubting that, because they have your very unique effects, but they're also very limited in their access. And in their idea, many of them seem to be just somewhat similar to artifacts. So I think a level cap would have been great and would have shifted the meta around. And also it would have meant that the early game would have had more PvP, because it's less of a race to max level when the max level is much, much closer. And instead people take more time to fight, rather than what we're probably going to see now. It seems likely to me that these new weapons are potential artifacts that they may be testing. Maybe a little bit overtuned versions of the artifacts, a bit ridiculous, to see how they would feel, and then test if the effect is something that could be interesting for an artifact in a downtuned version in the future. The ethereal dust system seems interesting, but also somewhat grindy. It seems that because you refine the resources that you gather into dust, it effectively slows down your progression on leveling crafting as well, because you need those resources for the ethereal dust as well. And it's a bit unclear to me how that will work out together, or what the requirements are to craft the higher tier ethereal gear, for example, if you still have the same crafting requirements there, or if you can level very quickly in the crafting skills with this ethereal gear. I don't know. It's just not quite clear yet how that works XP wise and resource wise, or if that's going to be a constant shortage of everything, especially again since everyone is also flagged. But by far the biggest concern that I have is grouping, or rather company scaling in this system. Because we know from the PvP island that even if you put the game in free-for-all, grouping is still going to be a thing. But in this particular mode, in these particular servers, grouping is encouraged, as far as I understand it, because you can just group up with a large portion of your faction and you can just zerg together. And as far as I understand it, that is going to be highly rewarded, basically, because you can use your high tier gear and you're safe for doing it. And I'm not sure what systems, if any, are in place to prevent that or to encourage solo play, or if they just want this to be complete zerg servers at all times. And I can't really put this idea together all that well with the losing your gear part, because if you go out on your own, you basically don't want to use the crafted gear at all, because the risk is just way too high. So you always have to do most things in groups, so that if you run into other groups, you actually have a fighting chance at least. And if that's the case, then it easily becomes a case of the biggest number of players together wins. Of course, it also heavily encourages rat gameplay because kiting is going to be extremely rewarding. It's much lower risk if you can almost always get away safely and you can deal damage and maybe you kill someone than it is to be in the thick of things. So yeah, not really sure how that is going to be balanced at all, or if it's going to be balanced at all. I doubt it. But yeah, I think the overall fun for the average player going onto the servers could be relatively limited unless they are playing with a huge company or they are playing either a very heavy tank with a company or a ranged kiting player. Just a very specific selection of people and not really all-encompassing in terms of what PvP offers. I'm still going to give it a try. If you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. I'm also going to talk about more details on how the system works exactly in the next days, so feel free to check that out. Thanks to all of my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Sloth out.